Yeah, but how is it living back there? Is Oakland like rough living back in like the place where it all started, or?
Oh, like emotionally? Not really. I mean, I just don't really like it here. That's like the bigger problem. I can
Yeah.
handle living in places where I used to get high and all that. It's just like really expensive and shitty. I don't like that part.
For sure, for sure. How's the book stuff been going actually? How's that been going so far?
It's going okay. I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of fear and just is this gonna just sort of die down or die out? And I mean, I've gotten some pretty big opportunities. I have some lined up. Like I'm gonna talk to Dr. Drew.
Oh, hell
So that
yeah.
that'll probably it's like that's a big opportunity, but it's more so an opportunity to continue going on other like larger platforms. You know, if people hear that, maybe Adam Carolla will hear that. I mean, who knows? You know, so that it'll all sort of.
Maybe a little Joe Rogan, maybe if we get real wish.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. It
Yeah.
could get to that point. I know that if he just knew about me, he'd be like, I have to talk to this guy. He was a homeless guy in Los Angeles. Like, I just don't know how he'll. I just have to hope that he hears about it because
Yeah.
he would love nothing more than just to rail on California for 3 hours with a homeless guy.
For sure. I have some questions about that too, about like this is kind of like a writing and book podcast, but like, we do all kinds of books and stuff. So I have questions about obviously your story and your life, but then like the actual process of writing this book for you and then like the tour stuff because like we have kind of writers that listen a lot of like writer focus. They're always interested in that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm curious about your how DIY it is, in terms of promoting this your own stuff nowadays and with books even when you have a major press backing you and all of that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, so that's great, man. I'm glad that that's slowly but surely working out with getting larger. Thank you for taking the time to do my tiny podcast. Yeah,
No, no,
you
of
going
course,
on
of course.
Drew? Yeah, that's gonna be great.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Wittstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Bored, and we're recording this on June 29th, 2024. My guest today is Jared Klickstein. Jared is a writer and independent journalist whose work has appeared in various outlets, such as the New York Post, among others, and owns and operates a Substack page, jaredklickstein.substack.com, also linked in the description of this episode, listeners, where he publishes his independent work regularly. And most recently, Jared is the author of the new memoir, Crooked Smile, out now from Bombardier Books. And Crooked Smile is a book that chronicles Jared's life, his time spent on the streets of California in the throes of the fully blooming opioid crisis, and also his recovery. The subtitle reads, What It Took to Escape a Decade of Homelessness, Addiction, and Crime. And Jared has been very open about his life and the realities of what it's like to be in the throes of an addiction, how it consumes all, what it takes from you, as well as what it gives. And he has quickly become a spokesperson of sorts, appearing on many outlets, sharing his story, including outlets like Fox, prominent podcasts, prominent YouTube shows, and has been placed as someone who has real-world experience with the addiction and homeless crisis that has been gripping America. And he's never shy about what he thinks the problems are, using his first-hand experience to back it up. And Crooked Smile is a book that isn't just a memoir, but one that suggests solutions, calls out problems with the current system, and offers a glimpse into what's really at stake when it comes to the addiction and homelessness crisis plaguing American cities. The comedian Matt McCusker called the book a supremely fascinating glimpse into hell, and fellow independent journalist Lee Fang, previously of The Intercept, has said, for anyone seeking to understand the homeless crisis gripping America's cities, Klickstein's writing is a must-read. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, and raised mostly in Oakland, California, Jared has lived a life that we don't often hear talked about so openly, so honestly. The whole truth there for anyone to see. And because of that, Jared has also kicked some hornet's nests. But Jared's book, Crooked Smile, is a one-of-a-kind ride in and out of a wild life. And I'm thrilled to have him on today. Jared, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm honored to come on.
I always like to start this off, and with you, it's going to be an even longer question for the most part, with a kind of, what was your childhood like? How did you grow up?
Yeah, well, my childhood was, I think it was decent. My parents were heroin addicts, though, so that there was a lot of hard drug use in my home. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and I had good parents, though. They were together, and they weren't on heroin when I was born. They had gotten off heroin some years prior, and mostly just drank heavily and partied and stuff. But they were relatively normal. But then I moved back to my dad's old neighborhood where a lot of his junkie friends were still kicking about, and they actually got back on heroin when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. So it was okay. I mean, it was very working class. My dad was a union carpenter. My mom just sort of stayed at home and raised me, and I never really wanted for anything. I mean, we didn't live in a fancy house or a fancy neighborhood, but it was pretty decent. But it got rough. I mean, once my parents started smoking crack when I was like 7 or 8, that's when things got really out of hand. Just general insanity going on in the house, and hallucinations, and they were hallucinating this whole reality, and it's sort of, I was a child, so it was pretty easy for me to delve into that and sort of hallucinate my own reality as well. And
were you aware of it? Like when you were like that young, were you aware of like the kind of, your parents are smoking crack in like the living room or anything like that? Like how aware were you at that age, young age to be?
Yeah. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know that it was drugs. I didn't really know what drugs were. I didn't see them use drugs. Probably by the time I'm like 11, I caught them doing drugs a few times, and at that point I knew what drugs were, so I sort of started putting 2 and 2 together. I assumed that they were smoking weed. I knew what weed was, so I thought they were smoking weed because it looked like they were smoking something out of a pipe, and I actually started finding pipes, and but it got really bad, so I had gone to DARE class or whatever, so I thought, okay, they must be smoking something else, something more intense than weed, and eventually found needles and things like this, so it became pretty abundantly clear.
And this was like the age of 11 you started putting this all together, you said, around?
Yeah, 11, 12, and then by the time I was 12, I was actually removed from the home and was adopted by my aunt and uncle in Oakland, California.
Was that CPS that came in and removed you, or?
No, CPS came throughout my childhood, like 9 to 12. They came a lot, but they never did anything. I mean, my parents, my mom got arrested for drugs, and then it sort of came out that she had a child, so they started snooping around, and in my opinion, they should have probably taken me away then. I don't really know why they didn't. But no, I actually reached out to my extended family and said, hey, my parents are, they're going to die if they keep living like this. You guys got to come check this out. I don't know what's going on. And they came, and then it was kind of like an intervention. And then it was agreed that my aunt and uncle would adopt or take me for like a month. And then my parents were actually both arrested during that, like a day after that intervention. And it sort of became like a legal matter. And I ended up living with my aunt and uncle from 12 to 18.
And that was like, so you're moving entirely across the country. I'm an East Coast guy too. I'm from Baltimore originally, but like when you move out on the West Coast, and just like the difference between East Coast and West Coast, and is always fascinating to me, like little things. But like, how was that? How was it when you were, okay, so now we have Jared coming through young age, starting to be like, oh, but I mean, I think this speaks to kind of how large the kind of crisis is right now too, where you said even back then, right? I think we're the exact same age, actually. You're born in 89.
Yeah.
was I, and it was this kind of, you know, middle class family, like middle class life, and then the parent, you know, just using drugs while still
Yeah.
maintaining this kind of middle class. Like it's so, not that it's normal, but it is kind of it's one of those unseen things for the most part that I think you capture in your work and your book and your life story, really, that it makes people confront this idea where it's like, oh, that's for stuff on the street. Oh, that's for, you know, people that are homeless in tents or something. But like they don't think about how it's like, actually it's your neighbor over here that has, you know, keeping up with house payments or whatever, and is just a user all the time. And so then you have, all right, so Jared's moving to Oakland. How was that? How was moving to Oakland at that age, and, you know, being separated from your parents? And
Yeah. It was very different. I grew up in an area in Boston that was it was pretty middle class, but it was kind of like the working class area of the town. And you know, a lot of my friends' parents had drinking problems. It was pretty open, and you know, a lot of people's dads did blue collar work. And you know, there was some broken families. I had friends that were raised by their grandparents and things like that. And then I moved to Oakland with my aunt and uncle. And my aunt and uncle, they're not wealthy, but they have some money. You know, they're probably like upper middle class. And they live in a town called Piedmont, which is sort of encircled by Oakland. So no one's heard of it, but I just say Oakland because people have heard of Oakland. But you know, it was odd. It was like a town in the hills, and no one's dad there was no blue collar work at all amongst any of my friends' parents. Most of them worked in tech and made a lot of money because they were of that generation that got into tech pretty early. And you know, people had pretty put together homes. There was no one else at my school that was raised by extended family, or you know, everyone had at least a one parent home. I mean, and even that was pretty rare. California was very different. People were a lot softer. People were very openly friendly, but sort of judgmental behind closed doors. And whereas in Boston, people are very judgmental openly, but like friendly behind closed doors, or you know, however you want to put it. But you know, people are very aggressive and abrasive in Boston, but very kind at the same time, and genuine. They're just genuine. And people here usually aren't. Especially now. I mean, it's just getting to the point where, you know, this place is just getting worse and worse, and people are just like steaming out of their ears, pretending that everything's okay, and you know, trying to be friendly. And while, you know, I live in a city that's collapsing essentially,
Right.
and everyone just has to sort of pretend that everything's, you know, a rainbow right now, and it's not.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that wouldn't happen in Boston. If a city was falling apart in the Boston metropolitan area, people wouldn't be pretending that everything's okay.
And so, like in Oakland, those high school years and all of that, when did this start to, when did the drug use come into play in your life? You know, like, was there a point in time that you remember, like your first time kind of being introduced to drugs or anything like that? Because I think we all, you know, there is a time, especially American life, millennials, almost everybody was doing weed, like drinking underage, you know, like this kind of stuff was just happening in high schools, right? Even cocaine, and all that kind of stuff. Was there a moment that you remember or could point to where it's like you started this, or your first time?
Yeah, in Boston, I had smoked weed a few times, and I drank, I think once. You know, I was very young. I was, you know, 11, 12, and smoked weed a few times. Didn't get high, but you know, I did get high like my fourth time, and that was actually the day that my parents got arrested. And I don't know, maybe there was PCP in it or something. I hallucinated for like 12 hours and couldn't walk, and but I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really got to escape, and you know, I moved out here and, you know, smoked weed and all that, but it was really alcohol. About freshman year of high school, I started drinking pretty heavily, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I could drink more than most people. I could handle it, I guess, better than my peers, and and I knew that my life would have to revolve around alcohol. I really enjoyed that it made me forget who I was and forget that I was the kid that was raised by my aunt. My parents were crackheads. So it just became like a necessity. And I made a pretty conscious decision to just do whatever I had to do. Any life direction that it went, it had to involve alcohol, access to alcohol. So, yeah, I'd say I was like a functional alcoholic in high school.
And did it start with just like, partying with friends, like going over somebody's house, or was it just like, hanging out in the park, like drinking or?
I guess it started in the park, I would imagine. I mean, we would go to this liquor store in Oakland that would just sell alcohol to children and go hang out in the park. But most of my friends would drink if there was like someone's parents were out of town and they could have like a little party.
Right.
And that's the only time they drink. So maybe they drink once a week, but I was the guy that would drink in the park or drink in the porta potty or drink in the bathroom of like a grocery store. Like I drank and there was a few other people like me, and we gravitated towards each other, and we would just drink any opportunity we had. I drank there was not a weekend for all 4 years of high school I didn't drink. There wasn't a single weekend.
And I wanted to ask you this too, because, okay, so you said it was kind of started with alcohol and some weed smoking. Like, what are your thoughts on, like, there's this kind of gateway drugs, right? Would you say do you think gateway drugs are real? And if so, would you say it was like alcohol for you or something, or your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think buying weed illegally and like having a dealer and a number and getting like a little baggie of weed and, being secretive about it and getting high off of the sort of bad behavior of it all was a rush and sort of a gateway towards other things. I mean, when I first started buying heroin, it's pretty similar to the process of buying weed when it was illegal. Now it's so different. I mean, now weed's legal, so kids just have a completely different experience. It's almost like there's gateway behavior, I'd say. And I'm not like a scientist. I don't know. I mean, I can't say that like weed leads to drug addiction, but I mean, weed's a drug, and I know people that are addicted to it.
Right.
And it's like the number one drug that if someone's addicted to it, they love to lecture you for hours about how they're not addicted to it. And, my uncle has smoked weed for like 50 years, almost every day, and he's never done heroin or cocaine or anything. So people are just people, and you're kind of like born with a penchant to become a drug addict or not. It seems like, but I don't like when people think that they know the answers to these things, especially doctors, especially people that have never done heroin, and
Right.
they see themselves as like experts on addiction.
Which is most doctors, right? They've never done
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
No, they've never done it, and they're also semi-responsible for like the wave of the opioid crisis. And the people that perpetuated the opioid crisis are probably not the best voices to, sorry,
Yeah, no worries.
are probably not the best people to give us lectures on the process of mental addiction. So yeah, the more you learn about addiction via direct experience, the less you actually understand about it, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think it's very fascinating to hear that too, about when you said it's more behaviors than it is like it, like, is it really like, oh, you're smoking weed, so now you're going to start smoking crack? But it is like, it does kind of, that isn't necessarily true, right? But it's like, if you're texting some random person, and you have to drive into like the downtown area, if you're living in the suburbs or something, and deal with like sketchy people, it kind of trains you into a behavior, but oh, this is okay, or this isn't, or at least just makes you, I don't know, like less afraid of it or intimidated by it or something. But yeah, I was just fascinated because you're always so honest about this kind of, we hear about gateway drugs all the time, and your take on it is, I think, interesting and refreshing and all of that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd say pills are for sure. I mean, a gateway drug in the way that it's literally heroin. I mean, if
Right.
you're doing Vicodin or OxyContin or anything that is, without a doubt, going to lead you potentially to heroin addiction. I mean, that's how if you talk to any heroin addict in their 30s right now, it's typically started with Oxycontin, and that's just a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, I've almost never met a heroin addict that started with heroin and didn't start first with Vicodin or Oxycontin.
Right. It's interesting too, because I grew up in it. Obviously, I was not on the street or anything or addicted to heroin, but it was, I grew up in the suburbs, and it was, my parents were middle class, upper middle class, and I went to private schools and things, and like the parties and stuff, people were just snorting things. Like, it was just commonplace, right? And not that everybody at that age was like, oh, I'm in the throes of an addiction, but it was just kind of how common that is when you're just in high school or something, and you're just kind of, people are doing, whether it's Adderall or, like you said, Oxys or Vicodins or something that they're just crushing up and snorting during parties or whatever. It is kind of crazy when you think about it. I mean, I don't know. Is that a new thing? Like, was that a new thing when we were growing up? Like, I mean, people were always doing drugs, right? But like, was it just so ubiquitous when like the millennial generation and was really in their youth? I don't know. I mean, I'm not expecting an answer to that, but yeah, just thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I know people, like our parents' generation probably did speed, what do you call them, black beauties or whatever, and all that. I mean, but there wasn't like this huge opioid pill situation going on until the 2000s. I mean, there was Vicodin, but yeah, we're pretty unique in that there was just this explosion of pills that were in some way, an 80 milligram Oxycontin is stronger than a dime bag of heroin, and it's the size of an Advil, and they were just handing them out to people. So yeah, I think we did have a pretty unique situation. And then right now the kids are in a pretty unique situation that's even worse than the situation that we were in, is in that there's pills everywhere, but they're not real. They're just like fentanyl pressed pills from the cartel, and they look like Xanax or, even Adderall. Like I know people that buy Adderall on Craigslist, and it's just meth, and they end up in jail.
Right.
They like take an Adderall and end up in jail. It's not an actual Adderall. So that was not a thing when we were, I don't think there was any counterfeit pills really when we were around. There was ecstasy and stuff, but there wasn't like fake Oxycontin.
So we have that, and then your high school years, you're getting into drinking, and this. When did the kind of drug use start? Was that high school years as well? Kind of getting into, like you said, pills like Vicodin and stuff, and then into college, or?
I didn't do like hard drugs in high school. It wasn't super available. I didn't really know a lot of people. I went to a school that was pretty serious academically, and people were just concerned with, going to a good college, and so it wasn't really huge there. But I went to UC Santa Cruz, which is sort of like a loser factory, and even though it's somehow has a reputation of being, I think it has a better reputation now, but it's not even that bad. It's just I went to the art dorm, which was just like a building of losers essentially, and heroin. People were just doing heroin, freshman year. It was everywhere. It really exploded, especially in towns like Santa Cruz, like these small college towns on the way up from, Mexico to up the West Coast. These were sort of like the heroin highways of the West Coast. The cartel was transporting heroin all the way up to, Washington, I'd assume, and it would stop off in these little towns, and it just was flooded. And I knew what heroin was, so I didn't do it. I was actually pretty against it, but there was a lot of Oxycontin, and I didn't know what that was, and people were snorting these pills, and I figured it was a pill, so I just started messing around with Oxycontin, and I got addicted pretty immediately. And yeah, it just totally exponentially grew quickly.
Yeah, and you said, I think if I'm remembering correctly here with my research, that you were about over 10 years, right? Like 10 years of being addicted to heroin.
Yeah, I think I tried it when I was 19, and I got clean when I was 29. It was 6 years ago. I think 29. Yeah, so 10 years.
Yeah. And I was seeing as I was researching this, is like you ended up working for the cartel for a while.
A little bit. I mean, I don't that sounds a little. I'm definitely. It's not an exaggeration. It's just it. When you say I worked for the cartel, it sounds like you were like carrying a machete and like an AK-47, and I wasn't doing that, but it was almost like I was an Amazon. I was like an outsourced Amazon driver. It's like if you say I work for Amazon, but you really just work for like some little company that delivers packages and has a contract with Amazon or something. It was sort of like that. I just, the cartel sold dope, and they had street level dealers in Santa Cruz, and one of them hired me to be a driver. So I did that. I just drove around Santa Cruz and dropped off heroin to customers, and I had a walkie-talkie, and the customers would call this guy. I forget his name. It's in the book. I forget Hugo. His name was Hugo, and people would call him and say, "Hey, I'm at CVS on 40th Street. I want this much or whatever," and he'd say, "Okay," and then he'd message me on the walkie-talkie and say, "Drive to CVS on 40th Street." I just sold heroin basically for 6 hours a day. But he would require me. Well, my first day, he required me to do meth because he knew I was a heroin addict, and he didn't want me to crash the car while I was driving, because heroin addicts are known to do that. They fall asleep a lot. So he required me to do meth to get the job, and but he would only let me snort it. He said, "You can't smoke it. If I find out you're smoking it, you're fired." So he introduced me to meth, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I worked for him while I was doing finals and was on meth for all my finals. I was on meth I wrote like a 50-page thesis or whatever. I did it in like 20 hours, on meth. I got a C- on it. I think it was probably a failing paper, but my professor knew that I told him I was struggling with heroin addiction. And I told basically all my professors that I was a heroin addict. And because they gave me leniency, they'd say, "Okay, you can turn that in late," which is crazy. I mean, they should have probably called the police or someone. I was at my college therapist or whatever. They have like a mental health department, and I came in there by junior year, and I was like, "Hey, I'm really strung out on heroin," and they gave me a prescription for Ativan. So like that was their solution.
Is that like a synthetic opiate?
No, it's just Xanax basically.
Okay.
So that's a really dangerous thing to do. Someone addicted to heroin, to like give them a Xanax prescription. That was pretty irresponsible. But these people are morons. I mean, they're therapists, so already you're a moron. But then you're also a therapist for at a college. So like,
right.
You're probably like the least qualified person to be. Yeah, I don't know. I have like zero.
My experience with that is kids would go to like the campus therapist when I was in college to get Adderall prescriptions or Xanax prescriptions.
Yeah, they're just drug dealers basically. So
they're there like one day a week usually. Like they come in for like a clinic, and then they just start handing out like prescriptions to. I mean, like you said, you were writing papers on meth. It was like, it sounds crazy, but like, is it that far off? Like I know people that were doing Adderall to write their papers for finals. Like well into grad school and stuff.
Oh yeah. People still. I know people my age doing Adderall just to wake up.
Right. Yeah.
Go to their shitty job. So I mean, these doctors or whatever you want to call them set a lot of people up to just be chronically addicted to Adderall. I didn't ask for Adderall. I was actually saying I'm a heroin addict. I don't know what to do, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't really know what to do either.
Take some Xanax."
Yeah. But that's another conversation. I just I don't have any. I don't really respect therapists.
Really? Yeah.
I
You've
rarely
said this. I've heard.
doctors.
Yeah.
I mean, I consider it the fakest job on the planet. I consider it an insult that ChatGPT hasn't replaced every therapist's job at this point, because it's a fake job. So it's just interesting that why not give a fake job to a fake thing?
Yeah.
But those are just my, I guess, controversial opinions. But yeah, that's what this therapist did, and no one stopped me basically. Not that it's their responsibility to stop me, but if you tell an adult at a school an employee that you're a heroin addict, to me, I think it should sound an alarm at some point.
Right.
And
I
yeah,
was literally like, I was trained as a college teacher. Like, that's my background, like to teach English and stuff in grad school. And they train you for all these things. Like if a student comes to you or they write about something in a personal essay about like being abused or something, like there's like a training that they put you through is where you go and inform people about it. Like you're kind of obligated, you know, like as a public employee, essentially. A lot of these schools are state schools, you know, like to inform the authorities or inform the therapy apparatus at the school or whatever it is. So it is kind of crazy that, yeah, like so you were in college, like if we're the same age, you were in college, I meant 2008 to 2012-ish, kind of.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
2007 to 2011.
Okay, yeah. And so, yeah, it's just kind of crazy that we don't do that for when somebody comes to you and says, oh, hey, I think I have a problem with heroin. And the response is to just give you another prescription. I mean, it is kind of crazy with the kind of the therapy state, as some would call it, right? The kind of, and you've had a lot of experience with this too, where you've I imagine therapy was that a requirement when you were getting clean and all of that as well, like in rehab, and then throughout the process that you've dealt with a lot of therapists, like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
don't
I
quite
mean,
understand.
I've been to like the fancy. I went to the fancy rehab one time that had therapists, but ultimately I ended up at like nonprofit, like almost like state rehabs. And there, it's not really therapy. It's just you have counselors that were also homeless drug addicts, and so it's more like conversation stuff about experience, and yeah, that helped a lot. And then I actually did have a therapist for like three or 4 years when I got sober, but he was a former drug addict that he was basically my friend, and he barely charged me anything, and he charged me $30 an hour when we started, and then he tried to bring it up to 50, and I did that for a while, and then I said, this isn't worth $50. I don't want to do this anymore. And he said, okay, we'll bring it down to 30, because it's like, I'm not paying you more than what I do. I have a real job. Like, why would I pay you more than what I make? You're just on the phone with me for 45 minutes. Why would I give you $200?
Right.
Because, essentially it was just like, you're a friend at that point, that we just, so I do credit him with, I guess, helping me. I don't know. I can't say that it didn't help me, because I did have a therapist, and I stayed sober, but he didn't do anything. He just listened and had the experience of being a former drug addict and who had gotten clean. So, but I don't think a therapist that didn't have any experience with being a drug addict would have been very useful for me. I mean, you just can't understand it. It's like getting raped and then just like processing it with someone that's never been raped, I guess. It just doesn't sound productive to me. I don't know. So yeah, that's kind of the whole basis of like recovery programs is it's like an addict working with another addict. You just kind of understand each other on almost like a cosmic level in comparison to another human.
And you go
yeah,
into,
listen.
sorry, yeah, no, please.
Oh
go
no,
on.
no. Well, I don't mean to like just shit on everything, but there's all these like experts that get paid a lot of money that don't know anything, and people would say I am the level that like on the same level as like the foremost experts on addiction, just like any drug addict is. I mean, you go out on the street and you find a crazy homeless guy, he is an expert on homelessness. Far more than any person that went to college and learned about social studies or whatever, social justice programs or whatever. Like, just like a black person is an expert on being a black person, far more than any person that has a graduate degree in African American studies. So so I just, it's just funny that people go to school for 8 years and pay $500,000 for an education on something that
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus, extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
And I know 100 times more than them, and I still know nothing. I know nothing about it. You know, I understand nothing. It doesn't make sense. I mean, there's people that were horrifically homeless and addicted for years that are able to turn their lives around, and then there's people that come from good families with everything at their fingertips and every rehab and every program, and they can't stay sober. You know, it's just we don't understand this.
Did you
seems
ever?
random.
Yeah, this is for my own. Have you ever read Anthony Kiedis's book Scar Tissue? I'm a big Chili Peppers fan, but
yeah, I did I bought it when I lived at a homeless shelter for about 6 months, and I got it, and I read it, and then I relapsed and I sold all my book. I had like 20 books, and I sold them for like $16 at the bookstore, and bought heroin. But yeah, I love Scar Tissue. It was great.
Yeah, he has that scene where he talks about like his first stint in like the rehab situation, and I've always remembered it since, where he talks about just like when he was there, you know, whatever, 15, 20 people in a room, and the counselor, like obviously the counselor was a former addict, was just saying, look around the room at everybody sitting here. He's like, only one of you will not be back here. You know, like only one of you will stay clean out of all of you sitting in this room right now trying to get clean. Yeah. And like all of that, I was just like, wow, like it's a power that like you said, it's really difficult to grasp the power of those drugs and the addiction and all of that. Like it's so hard to put into scientific terms. Like people are trying to put like it into like a science term or something, you know, like, oh, this is human psychology, or, oh, this is a medical issue or something. And you're just kind of sitting there like, I don't know, man. Like there's a pull, like something within you. Like Anthony Kiedis even says it, and this guy was a fucking millionaire, you know, doing it.
Yeah, like he relapsed. Like if you had $1 billion, if Jeff Bezos became a heroin addict, there's no amount of money that he could pay to not be a heroin addict.
Right.
You know, you can't buy it. You can buy almost anything, but you can't buy that. And most of the time, it's actually a detriment to have money.
Right.
That typically hurts you.
Yeah, you've said this before.
To a lot of money.
Yeah, because you can just keep buying it until you kill yourself, essentially, with it.
Or your family will just keep putting you into these fancy rehabs that cost a ton of money that don't fix anybody. Usually, I mean, the success rate is, I don't know. I've seen numbers where it shows that actually the success rate is really just the same across the board, no matter what. You know, it's like 5%. But you know that. Yeah, when you're sitting in a room in a rehab and there's 30 people, or let's say 20 people, and you know it's like one of you people will make it this time. One of you will make it this time, but you know then 19 of you will come back, and then one of the 19 will make it. So it's not like the real success rate is at 5%. I think it's higher. It's just that every round you try, you got like a 1 in 20 chance of making it, and sometimes it takes 6 rounds, and then you're finally, it's like a lottery. It's like this time you're one of those, the 1 out of 20 people, but a lot of people die before that happens.
And I think this is why your voice is so important on this matter too. I think because I think like so many people aren't willing to be honest about this too. I remember listening to another former addict that wrote a book, and in an interview I was listening. God, I wish I could remember his name now, but I'm just thinking of it. Where he talks about he had that situation where his father was kind of wealthy in LA, you know, executive or a lawyer or something like that. And so every time he would go to rehab, they'd be like, you know, he was asked, what did that feel like? He's like, what did it feel like? He's like, I felt like a fucking rock star, dude. He's like, I would get arrested. He's like, and then within 2 days, I would be on a plane, sunglasses on, getting a mud bath, you know, at this fancy rehab, getting massages and stuff. He's like, I felt like Mick Jagger, like just like, you know, walking out of a plane to this stuff. And he said, and it never worked until it did, right? Until it finally did work. But just crazy that there's something there that's just unable to be, or we're not studying it correctly, or we're not even looking at it the correct way. And that's why I think, your book and your story is so important to this. But I wanted to ask, you know, How long, when you ended up on the street? And when I was researching this, you said it was you were post college, you were working for, kind of a low level drug dealer for the cartel, kind of delivery guy, right? Like delivering heroin. How did you end up on the street, and how long were you on the street?
Yeah, let's see. Well, I worked for that guy for like a month, and then I actually started smoking the meth. Like he told me that I couldn't do, and I immediately kind of lost my mind and got pretty conspiratorial and started accusing him of some things, like conspiracy stuff. And then he knew, he said, okay, you're smoking meth. Like I can tell you're crazy. And he fired me. And that was my source of income. And I didn't pay rent that month. My lease was up. My family was my aunt and uncle were pretty suspicious at that point. It all fell apart basically. And I couldn't pay. I couldn't go get a new place. I had no money. I fell in with some sort of methy people in Santa Cruz, and they were homeless. So I just became homeless. I actually had a car at the time. Actually, it was my aunt's car. I essentially stole it, and that's why she didn't talk to me for 13 years. I lost that car pretty quickly. But I slept outside for the first time in Santa Cruz, California, and then I called my aunt and uncle in Los Angeles, a different set of aunt and uncle, and they said, we'll give you one shot. You have health insurance through your college, so we'll get you into one of these fancy rehabs, and your life will turn around, and that will be it. And that's what happened. I went to LA. I got into this rehab. I got high like 7 times. They kicked me out, and my aunt and uncle said, we're never going to talk to you again if you screw this up. And I screwed it up, and they kept their word. And I was in Los Angeles, and when you're homeless in Los Angeles, you sort of just gravitate towards Skid Row because that's where you can buy drugs if you're a homeless drug addict. And I lived on Skid Row at 22. I ended up there, and I lived there for like 6 months. And it was pretty scary and pretty frightening, and people were, trying to fight me and trying to take advantage of me. And I was a college kid that wasn't very intimidating, and it was pretty rough. I immediately discovered that you sort of had to develop friends and a crew, and I fell in with like a group of Mexican ex-gangbanger guys that had tattoos all over their body and had been on Skid Row for a while and knew the ropes. And they didn't like me, but I displayed my worth to them. I stole a bunch of socks and some supplies, and I'd give it to them. And I made it very, and then I actually stole a laptop at some point and asked one of them to help me sell it, and he did, and we sort of struck up a conversation, became friendly, and he was very impressed that I stole this laptop and realized that, hey, I could actually be an asset to him. I'm pretty good at stealing things because of the way I look, and I can just sort of get into places that undetected, unlike him, who was like a dirty homeless guy who had been homeless for a while and had face tattoos and stuff. So,
right.
It wasn't super easy for him. So that's how I got into that crew. And I was with that crew for probably like a month into my homelessness. So, like 5 months I was with that crew.
Were you just like kind of sleeping in tents and stuff on like in Skid Row, or like little makeshift, places?
Yeah, we had tents. A lot of homeless people like share tents or whatever. I had my own tent. We did pretty well. We were a good crew. We slept on a freeway overpass about 5 blocks from Skid Row. So that was our spot. Back then, if you slept on Skid Row, the cops would come at like 5 or 6 a.m. and make you break down your tent. You'd have to break down your tent and carry your tent around every day. It was actually pretty difficult to be homeless back then. It was like 2011, I think. I think 2011. So we actually slept Skid Row adjacent because we could keep our tents up all day, and then someone would always be in the area to sort of keep an eye on all our tents. And I actually had a lot of fun. It was pretty good. It was pretty lucrative. I made good money. I had a fun time.
And I think that's what's important too, is that you're very honest about like, actually it was a blast, right? It was a lot of fun actually to do this. And I think that's an underrated point. Is like, oh, why do people do this? Well, it's fucking a blast, dude. I mean, like, you know, you was there like a freedom? Did you feel like free, like kind of at that stage of your life, at least, you know, like.
Yeah, well, and I was doing I was doing heroin, but I was doing a lot of meth, and meth does give you the power to sort of get through anything. It is. Well, first of all, if you don't sleep, you know, meth makes it so you don't sleep. And if you're not sleeping, you're not really homeless. You're just sort of out having a good time. I mean, you know, you sleep like once every 4 days. So you're really just homeless 1 out of 4 days. And the other times you're just kind of out adventuring. And meth really helps. And I think that's why a lot of homeless people do meth. And a lot of people that do meth end up homeless because you also lose your mind. And, you know, you're not going to pay your rent. You're not going to keep a job. You become a crazy person. So it's pretty hard to maintain living inside when you're on meth. And
you've also talked about the kind of the at this time when you were in college, with the kind of the Occupy Wall Street movements that were happening. And these, and not just that, but larger protest movements that we've seen over the last, you know, decade or so, where you've kind of talked about how drug addicts and stuff will take advantage of these big mass gatherings to some way. And it's always very fascinating to hear you kind of go into, you know, everyone talks about, like, it's in the news all the time, or the most recent riots kind of in 2020 and stuff, where there's like these Occupy movements where they're occupying a piece of like an area, and everyone's like, oh, it's, you know, it's mostly peaceful because there's people out there with signs singing songs or whatever. But then there's also this kind of, like, you know, theft, you know, it gets taken over very quickly by kind of like illegal activity or you know, drug addicts and stuff like that. But I just, go into a little bit about that in terms of, because I think it's an angle that I think is people don't want to admit, that like when you have a group of people out there kind of just, you know, sleeping in this area, not leaving, occupying this thing, and they're allowed to, that it's ripe for these kind of opportunities. And I think that you're one of the people that talks about this, I think, very honestly. And I think it's just incredibly fascinating, like how that dynamic, because, you know, it's not like, oh, it did anything. The dynamic just kind of sets itself up for it. And then, sorry, I don't mean to keep rambling.
No, it's okay. No, you're exactly. That's correct. Occupy LA was happening during my initial descent into Skid Row living, and Occupy LA was right next to Skid Row. Actually, it was in downtown Los Angeles, and you know, a lot of people had graduated college the year prior, and the economy was really bad, so they probably didn't have jobs, and there was like this, I don't know, 1,000 people in front of LA City Hall who were there for the Occupy Wall Street protest, and I sort of just wound up there as a coincidence right around the same time. And you know, I went there and I looked like someone that should have been there as a protester. You know, I looked like a college kid. But very quickly, you know, homeless people from Skid Row started moving in because they saw it as this is the bottom line, is that on Skid Row, you had to break down your tent every day. And at the Occupy Wall Street protests, you didn't. You could leave your tent standing all day, and makes being homeless a lot easier, because then you don't have to carry around your tent. So immediately that's sort of the reason why a lot of people went there. Second of all, they were handing out free tents that were in better condition than the tent that you may have had on Skid Row. They were also handing out food and all kinds of things, so it was naturally you would obviously go there. And then third of all, there was a lot of victims. There was a lot of potential victims there. So that was, you know, the reason why I went there. And that's the reason why my little crew would go there, because there was college kids that, first of all, they wanted to buy drugs. Maybe it wasn't heroin and meth, but maybe it was cocaine or something. There was people to rip off. There was people to rob. That's where I got that laptop, where I initially proved my worth to these guys. And there was like rich college kids that were LARPing as revolutionaries, sleeping in tents, and they had money and they had all kinds of stuff. And then it got really dark, and then, you know, gangs started moving in. There's a gang culture of Skid Row to some extent, and gangs started moving in, and that's when violence started happening, and, you know, rapes became pretty regular. You know, women getting drugged and raped, or just raped. There's a lot of screaming going on, then there was a lot of accusations of rape. Someone would just didn't like somebody. Some homeless guy would fight with another homeless guy, and then all of a sudden you'd yell, "I caught him raping someone," and then everyone just like, pummels this guy, and
Right.
it gets like, and then they're formed like almost like warlords. Sections of this Occupy area. There was like different clans and warlords, and it got pretty weird, and then there was and then the stabbing started,
Right.
and that's when the police really came in and just broke it all up, because it was like, this has morphed into something that's pretty dark. Yeah.
I think,
So
yeah,
that happened.
we saw it play out, I think, even just in the kind of the occupied zones during 2020 and 2021 and kind of the Antifa stuff, where I think that you put your finger on the key dynamic of that, where people would be like, oh, it's mostly peaceful, because there would be these groups of college students singing Kumbaya. But then there were also this other thing that, nobody really wants to talk about besides you and a few other people, where it's like, no, actually it's ripe for kind of gang activity because it's so kind of lawless. And then there's all these college kids that their parents are giving them money, or they have kind of access to drugs and things. And it is kind of, it explains the night and day situation in all of these places so much better than anything else I've heard. It just kind of, not even like it's planned. It just happens. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, that's what the 2020 stuff, I think, was way more dark. The Occupy movement was something that most people could actually get behind logically. I mean, it was a pretty unifying movement. The 99% or whatever. I was on drugs. I didn't care about any of it. But just looking back, there was at least some kind of sensical structure to it all. I think, a lot of the powers that be got pretty frightened by that. And as you see after the Occupy movement, there was an explosion of like racial politics and very divisive, gender politics, sexual identity politics, things that the only things left to divide, normal people, the 99%, were fully implemented by corporate America and Hollywood and all that. And, is it a conspiracy that this was done on purpose to divide people? Maybe. It is a conspiracy, but it's definitely possible. There weren't communists at Occupy. I don't remember any communism talk at Occupy. There was almost like there was even some like libertarian talk at Occupy, or like I'd say leftist libertarian. But things got, 2020 was dark. It was a lot darker. It was a lot super divisive, and what some people would call, there's a comedian named Kurt Metzger who has coined the term intersectional car crash. So it was like these events where if it had been 2011, it would have just been everyone singing Kumbaya, but then it's just like the Palestine and the gay pride thing. It's like, we have a gay pride march, and then all of a sudden the Palestine people show up and they're saying there can't be any pride while there's like a genocide happening. And it's like these two people that should be allies are having an intersectional car crash. And, and 2020 was there was plenty of intersectional car crashes. And then obviously just way more lawlessness. I mean, 2011, there was a sense of law in places like Los Angeles and in Oakland and all that. And that completely went out the window in 2020 and has lingered.
Yeah.
I mean, it's lingered where I live. I mean, I was just in LA. It's doing okay. But where I live, there is essentially you can commit crimes with impunity. As long as you don't murder somebody, you can or rape somebody. You can do whatever you want here.
Wow.
It's a miracle that most people it actually does make me feel pretty optimistic about humanity, because you can do whatever you want here, and most people are following the law.
Right.
It's actually kind of a beautiful thing. I mean, you don't have to get a license plate or register your car or get insurance and all that, and you don't have to do that here. There's zero consequence for not doing that, but most people are still doing it. So that's actually a pretty positive thing I've noticed about here.
Yeah. That's one thing I noticed between the East Coast and the West Coast, honestly. Like, where I grew up, like, if you didn't have your car registered, you were getting pulled over, like, within the day. Like, if you didn't have it. Out here, I see people with unregistered cars all the time. I'm just like, what the fuck is different about out here? Is they just don't pull you over for it, or what? Or you just don't get arrested for it? It is kind of crazy for something small like that too. Yeah.
Well, here where I live, the cops can't legally pull you over for that.
Wow. Yeah.
They cannot. If you don't have a license plate, the cops are not allowed to pull you over. Which, I mean, it just wasn't like that. It just wasn't like that 10 years ago.
Right. I was going to say, I wonder if you said the difference is that like some of these laws in terms of kind of allowing people to set up their tents all the time, right? Like where you said back in 2011, they would make you break it down and you had to carry it around. Whereas now they don't make you do that. So it just makes it easier for everybody to participate in that kind of stuff. And it is kind of crazy for that. I was going to ask you about this too, where the kind of, because of what you said about this, you've, not that you have a reputation for it, but this kind of like controversy, right? You've been kind of, follows you around where people are calling you kind of a far right fascist or, you know, any kind of, you know, pick the label, because you'll say things like this. So I was going to ask you, like, why do people call you that? Why are people upset with you, speaking the kind of honest reality of addiction and life on the street?
Yeah, they certainly do. Some people, I'd say it's a minority of people, but they're loud.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I missed 10 years of American history. Like I was just unconscious basically from like 2010 to 2018, you know, so 8 years. I woke up in 2018 to a pretty different world than when I fell asleep in 2010. I'm just talking about my experience being homeless. I mean, that's really just the things I say now are just totally normal things someone would have said 10 years ago. But there's like this whole apparatus of, I don't know what you'd call it. I just call them communists, but you know, they're like, their career depends upon homelessness.
Right.
Their career depends on chaos. I mean, they work in like the nonprofit industrial complex in various cities like San Francisco, and you know, their six-figure paycheck relies upon this problem getting worse, not better. So naturally, they hate me because I'm an enemy to that. I mean, a guy that was homeless in the Tenderloin in San Francisco that was able to get out of it, talking is not good. You know, it's not good for them.
And criticizing some of the conventional wisdom of kind of harm reduction. And I know you have more nuanced takes on harm reduction too, in terms of like the label, you know, like there are some good parts and then there's some really awful parts in terms of like the current consensus in like policy and law and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course I'm not. They play a lot of word games, you know, harm reduction. Who would be against that?
Right.
You know, of course I'm not against reducing harm. Anti-fascist. I mean, of course, who would be against that? I'm against fascism. But they use these terms conveniently to represent things that the words don't actually mean. But it sounds like you're a Nazi if you're against it. You know, so. You know, harm reduction, I'm not against reducing harm. I was pro needle exchange. I mean, even though that's where I learned how to shoot heroin, you know, by like a college kid, you know, a college kid that has never done heroin in their life, or a art history major or whatever you want to call it, handed me a pamphlet on how to properly shoot heroin. That's how I learned how to shoot heroin. I'd never shot heroin until that day happened. I don't blame them. I would have ended up shooting heroin anyway. And actually, it's probably, and then this is the argument that would support them, is that, well, it's better that I learned from a pamphlet than figured it out myself, I guess. But so I don't mind these things. You can't, like, you really can't. I get it. You can't force someone to change their life, but you can incentivize them to. So if you are handing out things like free needles or needle exchanges, I'm not against that. I mean, needles spread HIV. I mean, I think it's good that people aren't. I think it's a good thing to not spread HIV, but if you're just handing out needles and saying go for it and not giving them any options of saying like, hey, here's your needles, don't spread HIV. But if you're done living like this horrible life, we have some resources for detox and long-term treatment. Now that's how it used to be, you know, at these needle exchanges.
Right.
I've gotten into detox through needle exchange before. But that's not how it works anymore, because no one's making money off detox, because detox requires a lot of work and infrastructure, and you have to pay people, you know, good wages to work at these detoxes. You can just make a lot more money if you just hand out crack pipes.
Right.
If you just get like a $2 million contract from the city of San Francisco and you and your two friends hand out crack pipes, I mean, that's a lot easier. I mean, listen, it's hard. I get it. It would be hard for me to not do that. I mean, I would
Right.
never do that, but I get the draw of that. So we're basically like farming homeless people to extract like wealth from the city off of the lives. These are human lives,
Right.
and they're dying, and but we're extracting wealth out of it, so, and, you know, which is disgusting. But these people have to live in it's like Nazis. It's like if you worked at Auschwitz, you had to tell
Right.
yourself a lie. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of those the Nazis were probably, or just, you know, lower level like members of the party were probably had to tell themselves a lot of lies.
Right.
You know, I'm sorry to compare these people to Nazis. They're not. They're much. I'm sure they're good people. I'm sure they mean well. I don't. You know, that's a horrible comparison, but in an overused comparison, I kind of feel
Right.
guilty for just doing that. But yeah, well, I've met these people. They're not evil.
Right.
Some of the people at the top may be, but you know, these are just losers
Right.
that mean well. That's mostly what it is.
And they probably don't quite understand, right? Like, because like you said,
Well,
that
they just don't understand.
Yeah, they have no experience with this. They have no idea what the day-to-day life is, and kind of even that kind of, even if you wanted to stop and you can't, right? Like this kind of, it's very hard for people to understand. I mean, I even struggle to understand because I've never had that kind of pull, right? Like in kind of a spiritual pull. You've said, and I want to get to this too, but what would you say is the most misunderstood part of addiction in terms of like people like that on the outside kind of looking in?
Yeah, it's without a doubt in my mind, it's a spiritual malady. It's not scientific. It's almost disrespectful to label it something as small as scientific. I mean, to label it a disease is insulting. It's
Right.
just, it's so much bigger than that. It's cosmic. It is a spiritual issue, it seems. That's just from my experience. That's from, I mean, if you talk to most people that have been able to get off this, it's, a lot of them are in agreement about this, at least the ones that I've met. It's just, it is something that can't be broken down into like human scientific terms. It requires a complete psychic change of everything. It's one of the few things that the more you quote unquote help someone, you're actually hurting them. Because help, or quote unquote help, in the eyes of someone that isn't a drug addict, looks a lot different than someone with experience with it. People use drugs and they ruin their lives and they hit a rock bottom, and a lot of these people that don't understand addiction, their whole policy is like, let's put a pillow down there so when they hit rock bottom they land on a nice fluffy pillow.
Right.
And that sounds really nice and it sounds really compassionate, but that actually doesn't help at all. It actually makes things a lot worse. And it's not just the people that are in charge of these policies, but it's actually the for-profit rehab industry is exactly the same way. They want to make money, and the way you make money is that you have someone stay at your rehab for 30 days. I've worked at rehabs, and what people don't realize is that it's actually pretty hard to get someone to stay at rehab.
Right.
They usually come in, and once you say you can't do drugs, a lot of them want to leave.
Right.
So how do you get someone like that to stay at your rehab? Well, you give them a hot tub, and you give them Pilates classes, and you take them to Magic Mountain so they can go on roller coasters, and you give them a ton of drugs. I mean, you don't give them heroin, but you give them a lot of Seroquel and all this Ativan and all this, and you drug them up so they're not a problem, and then they stay for 30 days, and then you get to bill an insurance company $30,000 or more. So that system doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
So this is what people don't understand, is that, you know, you're dealing with someone that's like psychotically under the influence. They're not making decisions for themselves. I mean, they are under the spell of a drug.
Right.
And you're just dealing with the drug. So you like trying to you're not going to negotiate with fentanyl. It's just not going to happen. Now that doesn't mean that I say that we should just lock everyone up in prison. I mean, obviously that doesn't work either. So it's like, what do we do? But we have to do everything we can to incentivize people to change their lives, and we have to stop rewarding them for not changing their lives. I mean, you can't reward fentanyl. Rewarding fentanyl just leads to more fentanyl. It's never going to end. It's never going to lead to less fentanyl.
Right.
You know, you couldn't reward me. And I mean, maybe, you know, if you said, hey, I'll give you $100,000 a month to stop doing heroin, I might have been able to stop doing heroin. I think I could have white knuckled it and stopped.
Right.
But we can't give everyone $100,000 a month.
This is something you've written about. I think that is, and others have written about this, but you've written about it from your perspective in a really, really great way, where the kind of, you know, the consensus right now, at least the political and policy consensus, is, oh, we need to build more shelters. We need to build more homeless shelters for people. Where you've made this point often, where it's like, we don't necessarily have a homeless problem as much as we have a drug problem, you know. And when you build these shelters, they don't want to go to it because you can't use in the shelter, you know. So like these even if we built more, you know, how do you get people to come to them? You know, like get them to stay there and not be on the street when they can't use in the shelter. You know, that's why they're not coming. It's like, it's the point you always make about how it's being misunderstood. Like the actual issue is being misunderstood.
Yeah.
And what made you want to write a book about this?
Well, when you're homeless for that long and you're doing drugs and you're getting into these crazy situations and you're going to jail and having all these crazy, wild scenarios, you know, you come up with, you have stories, you have really good stories. And you know, I always remained pretty close to like my high school friends and some of my college friends and who didn't end up drug addicts. And you know, I'd tell them these stories and almost everyone was just saying like, hey, you should really write a book. These are pretty intriguing. I've never heard anything like this. And you seem to have not fried your brain to the point that you're actually able to tell these stories. So people kept saying that to me, and I kept, you know, I was like in the situation where it's like, well, someone just needs to come to me and like pitch me like a thing, how they can help me write a book or write a TV show, or like, you know, someone has to do it for me basically. Like I bring the stories to the table and someone else has to bring everything else to the table. And, you know, just a very self-centered, immature outlook on it. And then I met a guy that actually had written a few screenplays and was sort of involved in Hollywood. And I said, how did you do it? Like, how do you even do this? Like, how do you become a writer? And he just said, well, you just write. You know, that's what he said. And I know that sounds dumb, but I said, okay, well, it sounds like I'm just going to have to sit down at a computer and start writing, which is obvious. You know, that's how you become a writer, is that you write. And so I started writing, and I wrote this memoir about all these. You know, I finally cleaned up and was actually able. I mean, I attempted a few times before I cleaned up for good, and it, you know, I could never even hold on to a laptop, let alone, you know, write a book. But once I did get clean, I finished the book. I wrote the book. I wrote a draft and, you know, showed it to some people, and they thought it was funny, but not really put together that well. And then I had to rewrite it, and then I eventually, you know, came up with a draft that was good enough to get an agent, and then the agent believed in it. And we shopped it around, and, you know, all these publishing companies said, yeah, it's pretty entertaining, but, you know, you're not Anthony Kiedis. Like, why would we just publish your book why would we publish a crackhead's book that no one's heard of, you know? So, and I get it. I wasn't even mad. I that makes sense. You know, Hunter Biden can write a crackhead book because he's Hunter Biden. Everyone knows who he is. No one knows who I am. So they kept saying, like, how is this different than anything else? Right. Any other just like nobody drug memoir. So it got me thinking, and I talked to some people, especially Michael Schellenberger, who suggested, hey, you know, you are kind of an expert, whether you know it or not, on policy. You know, what policies hurt you, what policies should have been there to help you. You should probably reframe this book as a half memoir, half policy critique. Mix in your own suggestions on what policies would have worked, and probably expedited your ability to nip this in the bud and you know, get off the streets for good. So that's what I did. And a publisher eventually picked it up. It was a pretty conservative publisher, which surprised me.
Right.
The normal regular publishers wouldn't touch it.
Right.
And I'm not mad at them for it.
Sure.
I'm actually, pretty lucky that it probably went the direction that it went is probably the right direction. The book is not overtly even political. It's not even overtly conservative or liberal. It's pretty just down the middle. This is what happened.
Yeah.
It will be framed as a far right book. I'm sure it already has to some extent. It's not. It's, if anything, there's a few passages strewn throughout that are, some would call pretty leftist, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, critiques of our economic model and things like that, but that will get blown by, and I'll just get called a far right extremist probably. But I don't care.
Right.
I mean, I think enough people will just view it as a normal,
Right. The cooler
middle
heads
book.
will prevail. Yeah. And I think I wanted to ask you a little bit about this. Yeah. Because I think people are calling you that, or calling the book that, like a far right book, because, and right now, I guess, because the left has been so gung ho about kind of bad policies that you critique, and then also, talk about the good parts as well. Like I said, you have a very nuanced take on this stuff that people don't give you credit for. But I think because it's useful to the right now, right? Like, so the right is like being like, oh, well, this guy's, on our side or whatever, and they're kind of propping it up. And then, like, how do you deal with that? How do you handle that? Like, kind of, do you just embrace the publicity because why not, right? Like, I mean, whoever wants to have you on, like, if Fox News wants to have you on, why not? It's going to help promote your book and your stuff and your story.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you deal with that? Sorry.
Well, they're the only ones that will have me on at this point.
Interesting.
Liberal outlets know that my story and my experience hurts people like Gavin Newsom.
Right.
It just does. But honestly, they're making changes. I mean, the San Francisco Chronicle and all these. It's becoming, surprise, surprise. It's becoming not a good sales point to be pro destruction of our cities. That's actually not working at the polls. So these sorts of outlets, I think, are becoming more open-minded towards things that I say. Sure. The right is. They see me as an asset because I am critical of, I'm not critical of the policies in Florida.
Right.
I don't talk about them. I don't really know what they are. But I live here, and I'm critical of these policies, and I live in a place where Gavin Newsom was the mayor. He was the mayor of San Francisco, and then he rose to governor of California, and he will likely be the president someday.
Right.
And I talk negatively about direct things that he's responsible for. And so, yeah, of course, the right loves that. And I'll take it. I'll take publicity.
Right.
They are not, even if you can be right for the right reasons or right for the wrong reasons, but, you're right. You're still right. So if they want to bring me on to talk about it, I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely, yeah. How did you get hooked up with Michael Schellenberger, who wrote the foreword to this book, and like Leighton Woodhouse? He's kind of like this circle of kind of independent journalists that were really focusing on this type of issues and things.
Yeah, I was on Twitter pretty unaware of these people, but I started seeing some things about San Francisco and Schellenberger talking about a pathway to alleviating homelessness and addiction, these epidemics that we're dealing with, and the mistakes of city governments like San Francisco and state policies in California, and it just started to kind of click, and I started realizing, this guy is sort of saying everything that I'm in support of independently. I didn't know about him, and not only that, I'm a former homeless drug addict. Like, we should be friends. This sounds like a pretty good situation. So I just reached out to him on Twitter and said, hey, listen, I was a homeless drug addict in the Tenderloin and on Skid Row, and I think we might want to talk to each other.
Right.
And he said, yeah, I think we would want to talk to each other. So we started talking, and he introduced me to Leighton Woodhouse. Actually, did he? I think Thaddeus Russell introduced me to Leighton Woodhouse, but Leighton and Michael are friends. So it all kind of worked out perfectly. You know, we're all just kind of we were on the same side that we arrived to independently and discovered each other, and we're sort of saying the same things. And I'm kind of like the perfect exhibit A for his whole philosophy on homelessness and addiction. So we linked up, and obviously he has blown up since, mostly for other things, but he's very big, and he's very, very generous to help me out and write this forward. And yeah, he's been a huge asset.
I love that. I love that it was just through like Twitter, like reaching out to, like, I think people very much underestimate the kind of power of that. Like everyone talks about the negative stuff of social media, and sure, there's a lot of negative stuff, but it's also like, you know, how would you ever get hooked up with something like that? You know, you have to write like a letter or something and mail it to them back in the day, whereas now you can just kind of like send a message or something, and you get hooked up with something that works out like that. I love it. I love it. I mean,
Yeah,
shit,
well,
this
I'm seeing that a
podcasting,
lot, you know, because I have a publisher and a PR firm, and they're trying really hard. They're working really hard, but they're sort of like sending emails to interns and stuff, and it's just not working. And I'm just like directly reaching out to people on Twitter, or in some cases guessing people's emails.
Right.
And just, you know, people, you know, you get a letter with like a generic one page, like, we have this book coming out. Like, would you like to speak to this person? Like, I get that's the best they can do. And I understand that they can't be me.
Right.
And reach out personally and say, hey, I'm actually a fan of yours. I've been a fan of yours for years. This is what I heard you say 2 years ago, and this is how it resonated with me, and this is how my experience directly sort of proves what you're saying, or validates what you're saying. And you know, big people are going to respond to that much more so than like a generic email that was sent to their assistant.
Absolutely.
So that's it's just the miracle is like getting them to check their DMs.
Yeah,
you know, but
I definitely feel that.
But one thing leads to
podcasting,
another. Yeah, so it's all very organic the way it starts building and growing. And
if you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
And I'm just on, you know, you just have to be genuine,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit, because we are kind of a writing a book podcast about that. Yeah, how that kind of the PR stuff's going. And I wonder, because it is so much of kind of, you have to promote yourself now. It's kind of even like the old methods of promotion and stuff in PR just don't quite, like you said, just don't quite work as well, because it's an impersonal email or something, or a generic one that you're sending out. So it is always fascinating how you're doing. And I mean, yeah, I think I heard on Rare Candy, you just went to a Matt McCusker show and just like handed him a copy, right? Like kind of the comedian.
No, I did that to Tim Dillon.
Yeah.
I gave him a copy. Matt was someone that I DM'd. You know, Matt wrote a book, and I've been a fan of Matt's for like 4 or 5 years now. And he wrote a book. And so I reached out to him. I said, hey, you wrote a book. I wrote a book. I really respect you. Would you be willing to write a blurb for the back of my book if I'll send you the book. I'll send you some chapters or whatever. And you know, if you're into it, that'd be an honor. If you're not into it, I totally understand. And he was generous enough to say, okay, let me read a chapter or two. And I gave it to him, and he said, okay, I like this. Send me the whole thing and I'll write a blurb. And then when I actually got the book, I mailed him the book. And out of nowhere, he just talked about it on his podcast for like 10 minutes. And, you know, it seemed like he genuinely liked the book. And This is something that like a PR firm or a publisher, first of all, they don't know who Matt McCusker is.
Right.
And that's not a dig at Matt McCusker. Matt McCusker is on the largest podcast on Patreon,
Right.
but he is not famous to like a 60-year-old guy that works at a publishing firm.
Right.
A 60-year-old man that works at a publishing firm would think the best route is like getting on 60 Minutes or something. And that's not a bad route either, but that's also an impossible route.
Right.
It's a nearly impossible route. Whereas reaching out to a guy who you're a big fan of that has the largest podcast on Patreon, unbeknownst to anyone over the age of 38, is actually much more attainable and has arguably more reach, than something like 60 Minutes. So yeah, like I'm telling my publisher, like, hey, I made contact with this person. I made contact with this person. They've never heard of these people.
Right.
They have no idea who they are. And in a certain way, they're much bigger than anyone that they've heard of, just on an internet level. So it's interesting,
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the only reason I wanted to ask about it. Yeah, because it is fascinating how the market dynamics are shifting drastically in this kind of internet ecosystem. But yeah, man, I mean, like I said, you heard it here first, listeners. I have no doubt that, Jared, you're going to end up on a lot of these podcasts. Rogan is the big one, right? I imagine that we're going to see you there relatively soon.
I would hope. I mean, if you've listened to him, you know that he'd probably like nothing more than to like shit on California for three hours. Not that I'm just want to go and shit on California. There's a lot of things I like about California, but he left California because of a lot of issues, and one of them being the increasing homeless problem. And I think he would love to talk to a guy that was literally homeless in California. So yeah. And my publisher knows who Joe Rogan is, obviously.
Right,
so they would be open to something like that, but no one knows how to do that. I know how to do it. It just happens. That's how that's how you do it. People, especially podcasts, they just welcome people on that they've heard about.
Yeah.
It's not like TV. It's not like even terrestrial radio. It's just completely different. It's very organic.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. One thing I did wanted to ask is, and you've talked about this a little bit. I know it's hard to kind of even explain, but kind of, what do you think made you want to get clean? Like, and you've talked about it kind of being a spiritual thing before, but like, you hear all the time people saying you have to really want to do it in order for it to work, right? Or at least for it to stick, to stay sober and stuff, especially from something like heroin. So what was it? You've said it was kind of this kind of spiritual drive more than anything that actually kind of happened to you, like an event or something, right? Like it was kind of just like a click moment or something just switched, or I don't know. How would you describe it? I know it's hard to even describe, kind of.
Yeah, what got me to, I always wanted to stop the last like 4 years that I was using. I mean, it wasn't, before that, it was like, I want to figure out how to stop temporarily, or I want to figure out how to manage this. After a lot of pain and a lot of ending up homeless and a lot of, terrible situations due to my addiction, I did start to want to stop. But it turns out just wanting to stop is usually not enough to stop. I needed something really, I needed some signs, I guess. I mean, everything had been taken away from me physically. I'd lost, I'd lose my housing, I'd lose my car, lose my job, lose my family, lose all my friends. I mean, I had basically no family left by the end. And most of my friends had left because they can't do that. They can't just continually watch you destroy your life and support that. So, eventually what happened to me was I ended up in a place where I would clean up for like a few months and then get high for one day and destroy my entire life. That happened multiple times. So that started happening. And then, eventually I relapsed it was one of these times where I just destroy everything in one day. And I woke up and I was like missing part of my face. I blacked out. I started blacking out a lot. I get high and just wake up, 8 hours later or whatever. And this time I woke up and I had, gotten into some kind of like knife fight with somebody and someone sliced me. And then I had done some damage myself by like chewing on my lip. And I was like, I was like missing part of my face. And And I was really like infected, and I just looked like a monster. And I went and tried to kill myself because I had $40, and I bought $40 worth of heroin. I wrapped like something around my face so no one could see it because people would have freaked out. And I overdosed in a public bathroom, and I actually did die. But someone came in and saw like a trail of blood, so they called the police, and paramedics came, and they revived me. And that was a pretty big wake up call where I didn't want to get high anymore, but I really wanted to die because I had sort of permanently mutilated myself. And I was fortunate enough to end up at a a hospital with a plastic surgery training department. And they did plastic surgery on my face and fixed my face. And you can notice that I have a scar, but I'm very grateful that they did that. And that almost gave me enough hope to think, okay, well, this is just an opportunity that no one would ever get. You can't screw this up. And I did get high one more time after a period of like 7 months clean. And I woke up about 8 hours later missing my toe. So this now turned into a thing where 2 times in a row I'd actually woken up with missing body parts. So to me, that was very spiritual. That was just kind of a spiritual response to, I believe in God, and I just think that, God can take everything from me, everything physical, everything like housing and the family and the relationships and the jobs, and leave me penniless in the gutter, and I'll still get high. So, I mean, something more had to be taken away from me, and I started losing body parts. And the toe thing was just an unbelievable event where I thought that this was a pretty humorous thing to lose. It's pretty insignificant losing a toe, but at the same time, it's horrifying. And it was just a sign. It was like, I'm going to start taking toes, and once you run out of toes, I'm going to take your feet, and once you run out of feet, I'm going to, I saw this. This light bulb went off, and it was just like, if you get high, you lose body parts, and it's going to be increasingly worse body parts. And something in that moment just made me become completely willing to get off drugs and do whatever I had to do. And that really meant just doing whatever I was told by people that had previously gotten off of drugs. So I completely humbled myself and opened up my mind to being rewritten. My hard drive just being wiped, and just like, let's start over. I'm not even me anymore. Like, I need to relearn how to do everything and how to think about things, and basically just followed around ex-junkies for my first year and just did whatever they told me to do. And the things that they told me to do may not have saved me. I think it was the willingness to do whatever they told me to do is what saved me. Right. So I just became completely like, I am a baby, and I just do what my parents tell me. My parents being people that had figured out how to get off heroin. So that's what did it.
Yeah, and like that's so like eye-opening too with it, because you hear people say, "Oh, you have to hit rock bottom," and you're just like, "Well, sometimes that isn't even enough." Like, you've been like, I hit rock bottom like plenty of times, but then there was this specific kind of within yourself kind of moment, and I think that is something that's another. You said earlier that it's actually kind of degrading to kind of explain it away with a scientific experiment or some scientific terminology or something, because it we can't just talk about the brain chemistry about this. Like, it has to be something else. And I think that's one of the things. It's impossible to study something, something like that in a scientific way. Like, and it's, I guess what I'm getting at is that it's kind of just like, it's the hardest thing that people try to explain it away with experimentation or something like that, or like, oh, we studied all these drug addicts and now we know what keeps them on or keep them off. It's like, well, not really, because you can hit rock bottom, but you still keep going, and then you have to hit it a few more times, but then even that isn't enough. It's this kind of drive within you, like this kind of, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, like I know women who they have children, and they're going to get drug tested tomorrow by CPS, and they're going to lose their children if they get high, and they have stayed clean, and then for some reason the day before their CPS drug test they get high, and then they lose their kids, and they're driving to get drugs, and they know as they're driving, I'm going to lose my children, and I can't stop. That is something that you can't. It's just like it's hard to, label that as simply a disease.
Right.
It's just there's something way bigger going on.
Yeah.
It's complete it's just like every move you make is just complete self-destruction in a relatively normal person otherwise.
Right.
It's just completely self-destructive in this one regard. So it's something that's really difficult to comprehend, and I wouldn't trust anyone that claims to fully comprehend it, especially if they've never been addicted to drugs. So
yeah. And the couple questions that I have there move more towards like writing specific stuff. Who were you trying to channel for this book, or who were some of your kind of writing inspirations that you kind of go to when you picked up the pen and started writing your story out? And I'm sure there's going to be many more to come too.
Yeah, perhaps. I kind of wrote the whole thing. I don't know how many more. I don't know. I don't want to say that, but it's like I just wrote my whole life out. So, and my life's not that exciting, from when I finished the book to now. It's pretty normal and mundane, actually. But I channeled Kurt Vonnegut. I tried to write like Kurt Vonnegut, and people even told me, "Hey, this is really corny, and you're not Kurt Vonnegut, and you got to stop doing this." And so the first version is pretty lame and pretty pathetic, and I tried to be really cool and sound like Kurt Vonnegut, and that didn't work. So I stopped, and I rewrote it, and I tried to do like a William S. Burroughs thing, and that didn't really work either. And I eventually, after many drafts, just kind of, I guess, developed my own voice, and that is the end result. But yeah, at first it was kind of pathetic, and I think a lot of comedians do that too. They get up there and they start just imitating their favorite comedian, and they don't even realize it,
right?
And it just takes time. It just takes repetition and time and crafting, and eventually you just become you. But before you're a writer, you are just kind of imitating another writer.
Were you a big Vonnegut fan?
Yeah. I loved Vonnegut, but Vonnegut was very smart and very like he would like directly comment on society and culture, not even like metaphorically, like he
right.
would just directly do it. And I tried to do a lot of that, and I did. And listen, some of it does remain in the book, but I just wasn't him. I was trying to be really. He
has a style, that just, I'm a huge Vonnegut fan, and we love Vonnegut on this podcast, so I love hearing that he was an inspiration. Like the way he talks about the world too, like the way he writes about it with that kind of, I don't even want to say it's masculine or like a male dominant, it's just like kind of a flat kind of so it goes thing, right? Like the kind of like just the way he writes about it is very unique, and I was the same way when I started writing, and absolutely just copying everything he did. I want to be him. Like I want to be Vonnegut and have that attitude and that kind of stuff that he writes about in that way.
Yeah.
And then you said Burroughs. Were you drawn to like Burroughs and the kind of Kerouac and like the beats and all of that, or?
No, I didn't really read. I read like half of a Jack Kerouac book one time about like climbing a mountain or something. I didn't really enjoy it, but I liked the book Junkie by William S. Burroughs, and I thought it was really unique that this guy was just a junkie. I mean, he obviously wrote other books, but Junkie is just like, it's literally just a book about him being a junkie. Yeah. And it's really good. So I thought, whoa, maybe I could do that. And he was kind of like dry and witty and funny. He could be funny, but it wasn't like a comedy book, but he knew how to be funny in dark situations. And so, yeah, I definitely channeled a little bit of that. And then, I read Trainspotting. God, I forget his name. I forget who wrote Trainspotting.
Yeah, the Irish guy, right? Or Scottish guy.
Yeah, Scottish guy.
Yeah.
But, that's obviously like written in, well, there was also this thing where Hubert Selby Jr. wrote he would write like and make up his own grammar sometimes, sort of. So I tried to do that. And the editor was like, we can't do that. You know, they edited a lot of stuff. A lot of my sentence structure was like, I don't know how to write really. So like I did do that at first, where I just kind of like would put, I'd break up sentences with like lines, like I'd put like a little, I don't even know, a hyphen line, and then
Right.
just like put a sentence inside of a sentence. And I kept doing that. And they were like, you can't just like do that whenever you want. Like there's actually rules to that. And I was like, well, Hubert Selby Jr. did whatever he wanted. And they were like, well, you can't, this is like going to be a miracle if this gets made. Like you can't be messing around with stuff like that. And so I did that. And then the train spotting guy, he wrote where he would like phonetically type or like write out words the way that they're pronounced. So
Right.
I did that a little bit. There's a lot of dialogue in my book of like street dialogue and like and I do that. I didn't know how else to do it.
Right.
I wanted to sound honest and genuine about the way people talked that I interacted with in my life, and I'm sure I'll get accused of something, like culturally appropriating speech patterns or something, but it's
Right.
like, what did you want me to just lie?
Yeah.
And I wrote how they talked.
Yeah, up until recently, that was very common in literature too. It was known as like a realism, like you're writing the dialect of a city, or you're writing the dialect of a certain type of character or whatever, like the accent or anything. You're writing it in there phonetically, and that used to just be normal, like accepted. And now all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah, so they're gonna give me shit for that, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you want me to get like a black guy to come and write pages for me, like for all the black dialogue. Like I interacted with a lot of black people, and they talk differently sometimes, or the ones that I was talking to
Right.
were talking differently. So I wrote the way they talked, and it's not demeaning or anything. It's just how they talked, and
Right.
so yeah, we'll see where that goes.
What was the process like for you writing something like this? And I mean that in a couple of different ways. Like obviously there's the actual writing that you talked about, where like kind of learning how to do this, where you're just kind of rewriting and rewriting and rewriting until you get somewhere with it. But like, what was the process like for you personally? Especially like, was it painful to go back and relive all of that? Did it take something from you? Like, did it affect you in some way? Was it relieving? What was the process like for you writing something like this?
It was pretty relieving and therapeutic, I'd say, and it helped me process a lot of these things that happened to me, and it helped me remember a lot of things, and I had to really dive into my own head and break down exactly what happened in my childhood. I forgot a lot of things, and there was a lot of moments of like, oh my God, this is going to be like a bestseller book. This is amazing. And then there was a lot of moments where I was like, you're a failure, and like this isn't going to go anywhere. And the more hours I put thousands of hours into it, and
Right.
and the more time that went on, I kept thinking like, oh, you've like wasted so much of your life writing this, like, and it's going to be really embarrassing. Like you shouldn't tell people about it until you get a deal and stuff, because then it's going to be really embarrassing, because you're going to tell people that you wrote this book, and then it's not going to go anywhere. And I mean, there was a lot of that, and then there's a lot of the opposite, and then there was excitement, and I don't know. It's like I can't even write. Like now, it's so hard for me to do anything, and this was easy. Writing this was easy in comparison to like doing my job, like going to work.
Right.
It had to come out, I guess.
Yeah, like it was almost being like drawn out of you, like it had to be done, kind of.
Yeah, just basically every day I'd commit like an hour or
Right.
two to it, and sometimes I commit 6 hours to it, and just depended on and then there were times when I just started writing, and then after 10 minutes I was like, it's not, right now it's not good,
Right.
and then I just stopped writing. Yeah, you have to be really patient.
Yeah, very long process in that, but I'm always just curious about, like the kind of the physical process of actually writing, and then I'm always curious about like kind of the emotional and even you say spiritual kind of aspect of it too. Yeah. So how do you feel about kind of exposing yourself in like a memoir like this? Putting your life into a book that people are going to read, right? Like that brings a lot of different things. I'm positive and negative. How did you feel about that? Was that nerve wracking or oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, I got scared about certain things. I as it started to pick up steam and I started going on podcasts and things like that, I was concerned with, okay, you're committed to this now, and the world will know who you are, and if this doesn't work out, you are probably not going to get certain jobs ever again, and you're not going to, I worked in visual effects for TV for a while, and I figured if I ever get laid off and have to get a new job in that industry, I'll never get it. I mean, people just Google my name, and it doesn't look good. Now it looks a little better because there's actually a book. There's like a published book, so that helps. That helps legitimize it. But before it was just me. There was just links about me being a drug addict,
Right.
and nothing, no book, So it's a little less scary now. But this is what I'm committed to. It's scary. I mean, because you write a book, and it's not like you don't have to work ever again. Even if my book is successful, it's like, what do you think? It's going to make $2 million? Like, it's
Right.
not. So it's like you have to have a job. So it's scary. I don't think I'll be getting a job working with like higher end clientele or anything that would be wary of hiring someone that has a history of crime and addiction. I don't know, but you just have to, do it. I got really nervous about going on Fox News the first time.
Right.
I figured that I was going to lose my job. They didn't find out. No one at my company watched Fox News, or the ones that couldn't admit it. So even if they saw it, they couldn't admit that they saw it. So that kind of saved me. But now with new jobs, it's like, yeah, they Google my name and they're going to see that I was on
Right.
Fox News, and I live in a place where people might want to kill you if they found out you were on Fox News. So I don't know. We're just going to see what happens, I guess.
Right. One of the questions I always ask, and I guess it's a good way to ask it now, is because we're kind of a writing podcast and stuff, I always ask writers when they come on, how do they make a living with that? And you said you have to have a day job, right? You have a day job that you're working regularly, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I when I wrote the book, I did construction. I did construction for a long time. I was a carpenter. I think in 2021, I got an opportunity at like an entry-level job in visual effects after I did some nighttime studying of visual effects, and I ended up actually moving into like the production side, and I did that for a few years. And then the writer strike happened, and which fucked everyone over, and now I don't do that anymore, nor does, I mean, it's just that the strike destroyed that.
Right.
The strike themselves out of a job, so I predicted that immediately, and now a lot of people don't have jobs. So
Yeah.
I work in property management now, just for like a little company,
Right.
and it's not like I don't know. I don't foresee it being like a long-term career. I mean, visual effects would have been like a lifelong career, and hopefully it'll come back. But
Right.
when the writers went on strike, I think the studios realized no one canceled their Netflix subscription, and that these writers were writing bullshit garbage. So no one cared. And now it's over, but the studios are like, we're not going to Netflix isn't going to dump $1 billion into garbage anymore. So, a lot less people have jobs, and including me and most of the people I know in visual effects lost their jobs and
Right.
still don't have their jobs. And it's been a year. So, thank you, writers. Thank you, Writers Guild of America. I hope you're happy.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of that, and obviously I'm not involved in that industry so much, but just because like a writer, I'm curious about all that, and the different facets of writing and production and stuff, and I've been hearing more and more of that. So many people are out of work now, and you think that it's done, and but yeah, I like that.
Writers think they like deserve this thing. It's like, what you made 6 figures writing She-Hulk for 4 years. Like, you think
Right.
you want more?
Yeah,
You
that
have
was
a
the
fake
dream.
job. Like, your job is fun. Like, people make less than half of what you make to like dig holes all day. Like, what do you want from here? Like, I don't know. My uncle's in the Writers Guild to retain health insurance. I mean, he wrote like in the 90s, but
Right.
it's I don't know. I'd be happy to make six figures and write bullshit.
Oh, you're telling me. I
Yeah.
think everybody listening to this would love
Yeah.
to be able to do that.
It's a lot better than making $0 not writing anything, which is what
Right.
a lot of people are doing now. So, whatever. I'm not super educated on that. I know that, there was a world where like you'd write 3 episodes of Friends and then you just got to live in a mansion for the rest of your life.
Right.
And that world doesn't exist anymore. And people were, I guess, upset about that. Or, I don't know. But, writing became like hey, guess what? You're only going to make 110 grand now.
Right.
And people were like, not happy. I don't know. I don't know the details. I know that there was like AI components to that strike,
Right.
which makes sense. I get that. But, I'd literally, claw my way through. I'd kill to just get paid to write some shitty television show.
Same, dude. Yeah, absolutely.
So good job. Now like I know people that are like on the verge of committing suicide and like
Right.
they've lost their house. So like,
Right.
thank you, the writers of She-Hulk. Thank you.
Yeah. It's the way that we're treating writing now too, even books, like you said, like, oh, everybody sees you, even if your book is listed and you get all this opportunity, oh, you're listed on the New York Times bestseller, people think that you're making millions or something. It's like, dude, you're getting a check for like 10 grand once. Like that's like what you're getting out
I've
of that.
made $0 so far. And I don't care. Like I know I went in knowing like, oh yeah, you're not going to make a ton of money. And what is a ton of money? I mean,
Right.
what is, if I made 200 grand off the book, it's like, okay, I'm just poor. I'm still just poor in Oakland. I mean, you can't buy a house.
Right.
You can't even. That's not even a down payment for a house where I live. And there's just whatever. I mean, that's life, I guess. But
Yeah.
I don't want to live here anymore. But my family lives here, so I'm here like helping them with some stuff. But I live in a place where if you have $500,000, you could put it down on a house, and then have like a $9,000 mortgage for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just not, a book's not going to do that unless you wrote the fucking Bible or something. It's
Right.
that's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
So, but I don't mind it. I'll just work. I like
Right.
working.
Yeah. Yeah. Where does the title come from for Crooked Smile?
Well, it comes from that event of getting the surgery. I do have technically I do have a crooked smile. And, I wanted to kill myself for years about this and really guilty, but I don't know. I tried to like weaponize it almost and like turn it into a positive. And I mean, am I happy that it happened? I mean, I'm not happy, but it seems like it was necessary for it to happen. And it seemed like it did save my life. I don't know if I would have been able to survive addiction if that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's like, it hurts to think about, but yeah, it's like turning the worst thing I ever did to myself into the only thing that could save my life, I guess. And I named my book after it.
Yeah. That's
It's otherwise a
fantastic.
corny title,
I thought I liked it. Yeah. I thought it was, and I said the cover as well with it, the crooked smile literally on the cover.
Yeah,
I think that's eye catching. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like the cover. I'm happy with that. It does come off corny until you read the book and you realize, oh, there's like a very specific reason for why it's named this. Otherwise it just sounds like a corny, like I had a troubled childhood
Yeah.
and now I have a upside down frown or whatever. It's just it can be interpreted as corny, but
I don't think
that's
so.
okay.
I think it's better than. I mean, I guess what was the Matthew Desmond wrote that book on poverty? It was like nickeled and dimed or whatever. I was like, that's a good title. But I think Crooked
that's
Smile.
decent.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. And the fact that you have the story behind it that you learn as you read through the book. Yeah. Great title. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. What is your routine like in terms of writing for because I know you have a Substack that you operate. You write articles for other outlets and stuff. And again, this is, writing is you have 2 careers, basically. You have your day job and then you have your writing. What's your routine like for stuff like that? Either writing the book or right now or.
I guess there's just there's certain times when it feels right and I'll just hunker down like a mentally ill person basically and I'll get like sweaty and drink coffee and just write. And it's really hard. I'm not like the best person to ask this. I mean, it just comes and it's garbage sometimes. And then it just has to get refined and you just have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And it's really messy. And, I don't know. I mean, I write some journalism stuff, but like I'm not a journalist. I'm not. I didn't go to school for it, which doesn't really matter, I guess. But I'm not that educated. Uh, Frankly, I'm surprised that anyone has let me write an article. It doesn't really make sense. But yeah, I don't know. My life's been kind of rough recently, just like with some family stuff, and I just I'm working too much at my day job, and like my writing suffers, and it's hard. It just has to kind of hit you when it's right. I don't know who could wake up and just for a day job write 8 hours a day. I mean, it just can't. It's just not. It just has to be there. The moment has to be right. For me, I mean, some people are probably different,
Right.
and they can just write every day. They can go to the newspaper and to their job and just write stories.
Right.
I'm not like that.
What advice would you give people that are out there either trying to write something like this, or even I think extend this even further in terms of like addiction and stuff as well? What advice would you give out to people that are looking to do something like you did, either write this kind of a memoir or even something smaller, like or not smaller, but just get over an addiction or something?
Well, if you're trying to write, the best advice I have is to write. You just have to write. And it's going to be bad maybe at first, and you just have to keep writing and keep refining and take chances and reach out to people. And none of this would have happened if I didn't just like an idiot just like reach out to random people. And 9 out of 10 people didn't respond to me, and I got an agent, but you think it was like the first person I reached out to. It was hard, and there's people I reached out to 3 years ago that all of a sudden now they're like responding to me, and it's just like just be a weirdo and just go for it. But also you just have to write. It's just like starting a podcast. It's like to start a podcast, you have to start a podcast,
Right.
and it's going to be weird, and it's just, but hopefully it'll lead into something. So if you're trying to beat addiction, humble yourself and do whatever. Be entirely willing to do things differently and accept that you are not going to solve this. The person that created this problem and perpetuates this problem is not going to be the person to solve this problem. So find humility. The world owes you nothing. You're not special. You're not terminally unique or anything. You're a drug addict, and you're not going to fix this. Any plan that you come up with, anything, I'm going to move to Florida. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change my jobs. I'm going to take up hiking, or whatever. It's like if you came up with the idea, it's probably not going to work. So listen, my suggestion is go to a 12-step program and find an asshole that doesn't look fun and do whatever he says. Do whatever he says to do, and jump in and surround yourself with people that are also clean, who have more time than you. And the chances are, if you're hanging out with people that are clean from drugs, you're probably have a better chance of not doing drugs too. Be held accountable. When you dive into a group of people that are clean, you are held accountable by that group, and you can't trick that group. They will see through your bullshit, and that's going to give you a fighting chance.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
And just know that it's possible.
Right.
you're not special. Like I thought I was special, and it just wasn't possible. And a lot of people thought that too. Actually, they thought this guy will never get it, and they were probably right for thinking something like that. But I proved them wrong, and I proved myself wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and then the last couple questions here are just we like to ask writers: are you reading anything good that you recommend? Watching anything? Listening to anything? Where do you go to when you're looking for books or entertainment or anything like that?
Yeah, I read this book called On Perks by Mike Rainey, who's a comedian, and he's not like a novelist or anything, but he was addicted to OxyContin, and he wrote a book of all his Facebook statuses during the time of his addiction, and then he'll post a picture of the Facebook status, and then write like 2 pages on like this is where I was in my life, and it's hilarious. I mean, just he's like, this is why I said this. This is what was going on. I was such an idiot. It's like, because you're an idiot. When you're a drug addict, you're like a selfish piece of shit. And you write crazy shit on Facebook. So that was genius. Check that out. On Perks by Mike Rainey. I'm reading Eye of the Chicken Hawk. Sorry, I'm grabbing
Yeah,
it.
no worries. Yeah.
Eye of the Chicken Hawk by Simon Dovey. This is a book that this is going to sound crazy, but it's chronicles the existence of an international child sex trafficking network involved in the dissemination of the pederast ideal. It sounds like a QAnon book. It's not. This is completely separate from QAnon, so don't worry. I read a book called The Franklin Scandal about this like child sex trafficking network in Iowa in the 80s. That was connected to the George H.W. Bush administration, and it was just fascinating. And obviously that predates QAnon, so this isn't like crazy conspiracy stuff, but this book sort of expands on that. And it's become scary to talk about that subject because then people just assume that you're nuts and you think Oprah like eats babies and stuff, but this is not like that. This is a real journalistic book. I barely have any time to watch television, but man, what the hell am I watching? I guess I'm watching Shogun.
Yeah,
Shogun's
that's
pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nothing's really knocked me away writing-wise on television besides Succession. I don't have to recommend that. We all know that.
Oh, yeah. Any reality TV or anything that you just zone out to, or?
Not really. I mean, I always love Cold Case Files and all that.
Oh, yeah.
I thought The Fall Guy was good. It's a movie. It's like a dumb action, funny movie, and it made me feel really good. I thought that, okay, maybe movies are back. There's no messaging in it. It was just a movie. It was just a fun 2-hour movie. Zero political messaging. Unfortunately, it didn't perform that well, although I think it was rated highly. I saw The Bike Riders. That was good.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. Yeah.
Great, really great performances by the lead actress. I forget her name. That was good. It was odd. It wasn't like plot thick or anything, but it was like a character examination of like one of the first bike gangs, I guess, in Chicago.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. That's it. We just like to know. Yeah, we just like to know what's inspiring you right now, or what are you interested in right now. Yeah. Final question I like to ask writers that come on: what are you working on now? What's taking up your time, your energy?
Man, I'm barely writing right now. I'm trying to write an op-ed right now for after the Supreme Court. I think it was yesterday, about the homeless camping ban thing. I was going to write like an op-ed for that and try to like send it to some large publications that will probably reject it.
Right.
I had this idea for like a paparazzi movie like 6 years ago that I was trying to start, but then that Black Mirror episode came out last season. It's like I swear to God, like I came up with a similar idea before that, and I'm not mad at them. They obviously didn't steal it from me, but they just independently came up with that, and now I feel guilty. I can't like pursue it. Maybe it's pretty different, but it's a similar concept of like the paparazzi trying to get a picture of a celebrity, and it's very similar. It's like eerily similar. So I don't know if that will ever go anywhere, but that'd be cool to write that. It's a little different, but it was a blow when I saw that.
Yeah, for sure. Did you do a lot of the kind of fiction writing, like kind of mostly TV stuff or movie stuff or scripts or?
I haven't yet, but I really wanted to do this script after the book, but I kind of finished the book right around that episode. And I'd have to really like work. Maybe with someone I could work on it to like make it a little different. It was eerily similar. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know how to write a script. It would just be a complete experiment. I'd like to go in that direction if the book does get any success and I get labeled a writer or a professional writer or whatever. I'd love to get into like writing a script or something, like a fictional script.
Oh yeah.
But there's Jerry Stahl. Jerry Stahl. He wrote Permanent Midnight, and I don't know what the hell that guy. I mean, that was great, but I don't.
Have you reached out to him at all? He'd probably really like your book, honestly.
I did reach out to him years ago. I don't think he's gonna like my book. I don't. There's just people that are not gonna like my book because It's kind of a hard ass approach to this, and
Right.
and I don't know if he's into that. Yeah, I know. Oh, Irvine Welsh. Irvine Welsh wrote Train Spotting. I don't think he's gonna. I looked at his Twitter timeline. I don't think he's gonna be a fan of my book. But that's fine. That's okay. You know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's always funny to think about. Yeah. That was all I had, Jared. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing all this. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an honor to come on. I had a good time, and yeah, anyone listening, but if that sounds interesting, what I just talked about, pick up the book.
Oh yeah, and it's linked below, listeners. Go click that link and buy it.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. This has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy.
bored,
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored. I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
inner,
Resources, American resources.
Being bored,
Some activities are intentional, right?
it shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.